like DevOps. My name is Cody, and I've got just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review with you. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you'd like to rewatch this program, you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording. It should be in your inbox shortly after we conclude this live session today. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options to do so. The first of which is the chat tab, which you'll find on the right side of your screen. I'd like you to start warming up that chat tab for us by letting us know where you are tuning in. I'll also point out that right above the chat section in that blue bubble, you'll see there is a link. Go ahead and click that, and that will take you to the registration page for our part 2 of this DevSecOps roundtable that will be kicking off on July 31st. Just go ahead and save your spot there. Additionally, if you do have any specific questions for us, we would like you to direct those to the Q&A tab directly to the right of where it says chat. Sending in your questions to that Q&A tab just helps us get to those and helps us stay a little bit more organized. So we'd really appreciate your help there. If you click the handouts tab, you'll notice there are a couple of resources there for you. So feel free to grab those. And of course, before we close things out, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of our discussion. So our topic today is DevSecOps. And I'm joined today by Reese Arkins, Vice President of Product Management at Mend, Neil Carpenter, Principal Technical Evangelist at Orca Security, and Neil is off camera right now, so you will just be hearing his voice. We're also joined by Tiffany Wang, Solutions Architect at Weaveworks, and leading this conversation is our very own Sharon Florentine, Managing Editor at Techstrong Group. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Sharon, do you want to go ahead and get things started?
I would love to, Cody. Thank you so much. And folks, again, thanks so much for hanging with us as we try and work out these technical glitches. It's Monday. What can we say? If you do see any choppiness or glitchiness, just let us know. I can always go off camera. Then you won't have to look at me. You can just listen to me. But thanks so much to Reese, Tiffany, Neil for joining us today. I'm going to kick things off by asking why you think it's taken DevSecOps so long to mature. I mean, we've had DevOps as a methodology for a decade or so. This is kind of, it looks like my video is frozen. So I'm just going to turn my camera off. And we'll go from there. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. You know, we've had DevOps for about a decade, and that's rapidly becoming the norm in software development teams and, you know, in engineering departments. So what's taking the security part so long to get in there? Reese, you want to kick it off for us?
Hi, Sharon, and welcome everybody. Yeah, so I think the question itself is a little bit a loaded question that it has taken so long to mature. I think you can divide it into 2 parts, right? You can divide it into the people who have embraced the DevSecOps approach. And maybe why they haven't realized as much of a security gain or maturity as they'd like. And then I think, though, maybe the majority of the market still operate in a kind of DevOps approach rather than DevSecOps. So I think if you look at the first part, the people who have embraced DevSecOps, and it's a pretty good lesson that, you know, just merely adding security to a job title or something like that doesn't automatically make it so. I think for many of us in the industry, whether you're talking security or other matters, you learn that whatever you incentivize is what you get. Right? So if you have security in a job title or a job description or a group description, but at the same time, the KPIs and the way you measure success in a group are not based upon security, for example, then you will see it not getting prioritized. So I think that would probably explain a lot of it, that, you know, unless you have like ways to measure success and ways to reward success based on security, then merely putting security in the title doesn't change too much on its own.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tiffany, you were nodding along there. So weigh in, please.
Yeah, I was going to agree with what Reese said, and I believe that a lot of it has to do with this large swath of tooling, of responsibilities that DevSecOps encompasses. And depending on the company, it could very well be that different teams have different responsibilities that all are expected to roll into the DevSecOps principles and deliverables. And to Reese's point, there are certainly companies, especially in regulated environments, that have no choice but to take security seriously and to ensure that it's baked in to their workflows and processes. But if it's not already baked in, if it's not already part of your developer workflows, it means that implementation, an introduction of security would require and take cycles to implement and for adoption. And I think that, a lot more collaboration is perhaps needed, especially if your company is one that traditionally separates security from DevOps, as an example.
Yeah. Neil, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I think Reese and Tiffany are really focusing on very high-level problems. I think collaboration is definitely one of them, and this becomes a technical problem. A lot of the sort of security integration into DevSecOps is done in ways that the security teams have to let go of control and let developers and DevOps teams do the actual integration, put the pieces together. That's been very hard for the teams I work with to let go of and really wrap their heads around, like, how do we integrate scanning into a pipeline, that sort of nitty-gritty problem, where traditionally the security team has owned the implementation and the policy and the outcomes. This is a much more collaborative environment. This is a much more collaborative approach that requires that sort of letting go of the reins a little bit and figuring out where the separation of duties are and who owns what and how we ensure things that are easy to do in the old security world, how we ensure that they actually happen, they're properly implemented in a DevSecOps world. I think the other one that I come across frequently is automation. DevOps engineers are by default, sort of by orientation, people who embrace automation, who automate things. And that's how DevOps has been able to scale and really accelerate. Security teams have been slow getting into that game and still tend to do a lot of things manually, a lot of things reactively. It's been, for me, a big lift working with security teams to get them to think of automation in a DevSecOps world as a way that they can scale and really get ahead of security problems in the DevOps world.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to a point that Tiffany made about highly regulated industries, and there's been a flurry of legislation lately around the world, the Cyber Resilience Act in the EU, the National Cybersecurity Strategy here in the US, and all kinds of other security, supply chain, data privacy regulations coming to the fore. So what impact do you all think that legislation will have on DevSecOps and its implementation going forward? Tiffany?
I was just going to say that I think that the legislation really underlines trends that we've been seeing. And if you take a look at them, they're not necessarily new concepts, right? And I think that this is going to, especially in highly regulated environments, if you, especially for government-related projects, right? I think that we'll be seeing things like strict requirements that will sort of help move and force, open source projects, proprietary projects to meet a certain level, for example, requirements for SBOMs, for ensuring that zero trust and software supply chain security are at the forefront of any projects for customer, for respective customers who have those sort of requirements. So I think it'll really drive even wider spread adoption, and also help drive maturation of workflows, especially if it allows and demonstrates that, to Neil's point about automation and how that's sort of driven a lot of the processes with DevOps, demonstrate that you can securely deliver your applications with increased velocity. So I think it's going to be even more widespread.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. It's like you said, it's going to force the issue, because there won't be a way forward if you do not comply. Reese, Neil, any further thoughts on that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll just say,
I think.
Sorry, Neil.
Go ahead, Reese.
Go, Neil. It's all you.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I used to think of regulatory compliance as being sort of a negative thing, as being creating barriers and sometimes just incentivizing the wrong behavior. But I talked to a CISO recently, and he really changed my thinking on it. And what he said to me was, for him, regulatory compliance is a way that he can get people to do what he needs them to do without them blaming him. And I think that's a great way to look at it. I think these are a great set of regulations that enable security leaders to get their teams to line up with best practice, to line up with where we want to see them being, without taking the sort of the internal hit on being the bad guy in the bad person in the conversation, right? It enables them to say, look, I don't want to do this. Government says we have to do this. Here's what we have to do to meet this. It gives them a great wedge, a great lever to force those changes and really embrace best practice and get ahead of these problems. So I think it's a really positive way to affect change for a lot of the security leadership I work with.
Yeah, it takes them out of that bad guy role, like you said. They don't have to be the Department of No anymore. They can kind of point to the other guy. Reese, I know you wanted to weigh in too, so.
Yeah, I agree a lot of what Neil said. I think that there can be kind of unintended consequences of regulation. When these types of regulations were being prepared and floated, there was concern from many of us in the industry that, because open source is clearly a pretty large component of any supply chain, any software supply chain, I should say, that too much of the burden may be put on to open source. But I think they found a good balance of trying to place responsibility on those who stand to gain the most from the open source supply chain, such as suppliers to government. So in the end, this has been a pretty net positive. Yeah.
So we have a great question that just came in from the audience. I'm going to introduce it here into the conversation. Someone asked, balancing speed and agility with risk management is a challenge in DevSecOps. Any advice on doing so?
I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think the first answer is automation.
Okay.
The business is focused on agility, right? The business is DevSec or DevOps is popular because businesses have realized everything is software. It's a way to be very, very quick when you combine it with sort of cloud adoption and microservices and all the other buzzwords going on. It's a way to be very, very quick to fix bugs, introduce new features, do new things, and that all has a positive impact on the business. As security sits athwart that, we definitely become the bad guy. And one of the things that we have to think about is how we are agile in similar ways, how we are able to do what we need to do from a security perspective, but without being a blocker. And for me in this space, automation is simply one of the approaches. Somebody told me recently there are 15 to 16 DevOps engineers for every security engineer in companies, right? So the DevOps side is already far ahead of the security side. What we've got to do is look at how much of our security policy we can automate testing of application of, so that we can continue to move quickly. And that one security engineer we have to every 16 DevOps engineers, we can get them focused on emergent risk and threat, more complex problems, higher order problems, and spending less time looking at checklists in Excel, if you will, of things that we want to do. We just want to have that stuff happen automatically, spit out a report, block a deployment if it meets a particular threshold. But for me, that's the first answer that security teams have got to embrace to get into this game and make sure that the business can keep moving at the speed the business wants to.
Okay. All right. Reese, Tiffany, anything further there before I jump around?
Yeah, I think what Neil said with automation is the key. Like our most mature customers put their focus on DevSecOps, meaning that they want to have automated security gates to approve or block deploys. Ultimately, if you trust your kind of DevSecOps stage, then even if something enters into the source code, we'll say, or the build, as long as it doesn't reach into production, it's a little bit like no harm, no foul. But what ultimately happens is as you get a deploy blocked, that naturally then leads to maturing of the DevOps or dev side, because if deploys are regularly blocked due to security issues, people then want to shift left, so to speak, and say, well, okay, how could we have avoided this in the future? So essentially having like a very strong like gating approach in DevSecOps is a good like foundational approach, and then work backwards from that.
That makes sense.
And just to add my 2 cents, definitely agree with Neil and Reese. And to that, I would add, it's important to have strong foundations. And I will get on my GitOps soapbox for just a little while, sort of speaking to the automation that Neil mentioned. In order to decrease time to delivery, increase developer velocity, and also velocity for your deployments in a secure way, you definitely want to make sure that what you think you're deploying to your target environments actually is what you are deploying. And there are definitely ways that you can have those guardrails be automated and shift further left in the process. Certainly having checks at admission control time, deploy time, runtime is important, but before code makes it to before code is pushed up to a store that, if you have a GitOps agent reading from those source stores, you want to make sure that those contents have also been verified. And you want to make sure that you fail early in the pipeline so that you have visibility for your developers and they fail faster. So that they can remediate the issue and then move on with their automated deployments.
Awesome. So I think I'm going to ask the question that may be on, well, at least it seems from, the pitches that we get at DevOps.com and what's in headlines a lot lately is, what impact do you think AI and generative AI is going to have on DevSecOps? Is this really going to help us as much as they say? Are there, hidden pitfalls that we're not really thinking about? What are your thoughts on that? I know Reese is waiting for Neil, but
yeah, I was just waiting for Neil on it. I'll jump in, Neil. Yeah, so I actually was realizing just last week that within our company, Mend, actually, our kind of DevSecOps team is probably the leading adopter of AI at the moment. I think perhaps one of the reasons is, developers have a tendency to be doubtful that the machine could do their job or something, whereas DevOps and DevSecOps tend to be kind of stepping into multiple worlds. They may know a bit of programming, scripting, infrastructure, and things like that. So when they find a tool that can help them move faster, they seem to be kind of adopting it. I'd say the biggest risk of that at the moment, but it's hopefully like a more short-term risk, is, what's known as like hallucinations in AI. AI is sometimes very confidently wrong, and always confidence, usually right. So that's a bit of a challenge, because if that DevSecOps is that final gate that you have to have complete trust in, if they put complete trust in AI and it's confidently wrong at times, then that's a bit of a problem. But we've seen that the leading companies are all kind of working on that aspect. So overall, I see it as a pretty net positive, especially when it comes to speeding up scripting, infrastructure as code, and things like that.
Yeah. Neil?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I can agree with that. A couple of things that occur to me. So first of all, it's not, we're talking about large LLMs, large language models, whatever. I forget what it stands for, but
I don't know if Neil is waiting for me or if I'm waiting for Neil. But I think that when it comes to AI and generative AI, maybe I am maybe too cautious, certainly quite cautious. And some applications certainly can be on the generative AI side, where things like scripting, putting together infrastructure as code might be some applications. And you could also potentially leverage AI and look towards, discovering vulnerabilities. And so I would say that there is definitely a lot to learn more and understand more about when it comes to AI, because it is so new, and use should be carefully considered, with some applications being relatively more straightforward than others, I would say.
Yeah.
So I think with LLMs in particular, with generative AI, what's important is that we think of it as an advisor and not a solution. It's got to be part of a bigger pipeline, a bigger picture. Like in our product, we use LLMs, we use GPT-4 to give security teams an option on alerts to generate some sort of idea of how they might solve it.
I'm not sure if it's my connection or everybody else, but Sharon and Neil, are you still there?
I was hearing Neil just fine.
Yeah, I think we're having an issue where you're not able to hear Neil because he's... Uh-oh.
Yeah, so no worries. So I'm still here.
You keep going.
I'll let people figure that out on the back end. But I think, so in our product, we use it in an alert. A security person can say, I'm not sure how to resolve this issue with permissions on an S3 bucket, let's say, and I need to solve it in Terraform. And we'll use LLM to give you an idea of what that might look like. Now, what you shouldn't do is go and immediately apply that, but you are getting a good example of, hey, based on my strength as an AI, not me personally, but GPT-4's strength as an AI, we've gone and found something that we think is a good solution, and we're providing that to you to show you what that looks like. I think what we're going to find is two things will happen. First of all, some people will implement AI wrong and cause some spectacular failures in the industry. Sort of, if you read the story about the lawyer who was using GPT-4 to generate briefs and it turned out it was making up all the citations in them, we're going to have a cybersecurity equivalent of that happen as people sort of rush in and try it and push the boundaries. I think the people who are wise are going to view this as advisory. They're going to view it as a way to make suggestions, generate ideas that we hadn't necessarily seen before, and incorporate that into workflows and do good things with it.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Tiffany, I think, can hear me now, so we're in good shape.
All right. We're just rolling with it, folks, like you do. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and focus on observability here, because that's become such a huge issue in DevOps. And when I talk to folks in the security space and I bring up observability, some of them kind of look at me like I am a little bit crazy, but they look at me like I'm a little bit crazy. And I tend to think of observability as something of a security issue that you can find and, identify and find downtime and prevent it. But am I crazy? I mean, is observability part of this issue, and how does it tie into DevSecOps? Uh-oh.
Well, I'll jump in if nobody else is going to.
Okay.
So I can't say if you're crazy, but I think when we talk about security, it's the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability, right? So availability is definitely a security issue right out of the gate. And I think observability, I say all the time, you can't secure what you can't see. And that's an inventory problem. That's an observability problem for what's happening inside of workloads, inside of sort of across the board. It's a key security problem that I think we have not done a good job universally over the past 5 or 6 years solving in the cloud space and then solving in the DevOps space. So yeah, I think it's a key problem. In DevOps, I think there's two real problems there. The first one is sort of, how do I see before something gets deployed? How do I understand what's coming through? State is, what its problems are, what its composition is, from developer's desktop to the moment of deployment. Typically, post-deployment, we usually have a good view of what's actually running, what's going on. The other observability problem I have is the tail end of that, because we say shift left and we think of this as a linear problem. I start at the developer's desktop, I go to the source control, I go to the pipeline, I deploy, but it's really very much a circle. After I deploy, I'm going to find new vulnerabilities, new problems, which feed back to the developer's desktop, back to the pipeline. And the other problem I see us wrestling with in the industry is, as we scale, how do I figure out who in the DevOps side of the circle needs to solve a particular problem? When I'm looking at a particular container deployed that has a vulnerability in it, or a particular resource deployed in the cloud that has a Terraform template behind it, I see a lot of companies struggle with figuring out how to close that gap and make that circle whole. So very much a problem, I think, of when we dive in here.
Well, that certainly makes me feel better. Thank you, Tiffany.
Apologies, Neil, for cutting you off earlier. Definitely lost audio on my side. But I would tend to agree with Neil. And, I spend every day working in Kubernetes myself. And observability certainly plays a huge role, especially if you are deploying security tooling to your clusters. So, for example, if you are dependent on your, policy agents that you might have running in your cluster, or scanning agents, you want to make sure that those services are available and successfully serving requests. And observability then becomes part of the, prerequisites, if you will, as components that should be deployed to your system, so that you do have the visibility and ability to secure what it is you can observe.
Yeah, makes sense. So obviously then, along with observability, because you are receiving alerts about now all of the things that you can see and monitor, how do you deal with the inevitable alert fatigue that comes along with this, especially at speed and at scale that DevSecOps is hopefully enabling?
I'll jump in on this one. I think so. Alert fatigue definitely, is a thing, right? And all of us in the security industry always need to be, thinking along those lines. Addressing alert fatigue really can be two dimensions. One is, less alerts, right? And that might typically mean less, what a DevOps or DevSecOps person might call false positives. Right, so at Mend, we deal a lot in open source security. It's known as SCA, software composition analysis. And this is that's that concept that it says you're using a dependency. This dependency has a known vulnerability, and you need to upgrade it. So if you look at that in terms of less alerts, one approach which mature solutions have is known as reachability analysis. So just because someone's using a dependency doesn't mean that it's like reachable or exploitable. So that would be an example of reducing the raw number of alerts. The other approach is you reduce the impact of alerts. Because ultimately, the reason people are fatigued from it is because like alerts trigger them to take some type of action, manual intervention. And so security areas which have the ability for automated remediation don't have as much of a problem with alert fatigue. Because if you tell a developer, I found 8 problems, they might think, oh, okay, that sounds bad. And then if you can tell them, but here's a fix for all 8 of them, then that's really not so much of like a burden, and people don't tend to get the same fatigue. So basically alert fatigue is reducing the number of false positives and providing automated remediation for those, regardless, frankly, of whether they are like false positives or not. Like just because a string may not be sanitized, if you have a very simple way of sanitizing a string, most people won't object to applying that fix into their code base.
Yeah. Okay.
So jumping on that, I think there's a third approach, and that is not necessarily reducing false positives, but providing better context to figure out what's really critical. Like I think I've thought about vulnerabilities in code for the better part of my career. But if I start out with, I've got a critical vulnerability. NVD says it's a CVSS 3 9.8. And if that's all I know, I've got to go patch everything pretty much immediately. But if I start looking at that and saying, all right, these assets are in a dev environment with no internet connectivity, whereas these assets are public facing in prod, then I can start to reduce the number of critical alerts that I have to go address. If I go a little further and say, maybe, I don't know, these assets are in prod and have access to critical data versus these assets have no access to data, or, in this particular case, this component is present but is never actually executed, whereas on these machines over here, it's present and executed. The more I can build on context and really identify where a particular risk is critical versus where it's interesting, it might be important, it might be medium, but I don't have to jump at it today. Those sorts of approaches help cut down and focus on just what I need to look at in the short term versus what I can plan, what I can batch up into bigger solutions.
Yeah. So I've got another question here from the audience about DAST, which I'm probably going to butcher this, but dynamic application security testing. And they're wondering how to reduce the time required for DAST while running a pipeline. And I know that's a little bit off the topic for what we're talking about as far as like technical, how-to kind of things. But if you can tie that into DevSecOps, is there a way to make that faster? Uh-oh.
I was going to pretend to be frozen for a second, so I don't need to answer. But I wasn't good enough. Yeah, I mean, this is not really an area of my kind of expertise, but what in general for static or dynamic testing, the ability to kind of cache and do incremental testing is really the difference between too slow and fast enough. The other thing is that people can benefit from kind of like replayability. So instead of dynamically generating things every time, you can have the ability to run, kind of like, like a fuzzing approach, but to save and replay. And that also allows for caching.
Cool. And then I missed this one before. I apologize. Another audience member is asking about organizing security issues by potential impact. So I think that goes back to what you were saying before about being able to see the issues, prioritize them, and then deal with them in order of severity so that you're not, quote unquote, wasting your time fixing, very low risk, very low impact vulnerabilities, and instead focusing on the ones with the biggest potential for harm.
Yeah, and so I guess I said that, so I'll jump back in. I think this is a multifaceted sort of thing. The first one is, and I work for a platform that does that in an automated fashion. Part of this is going to come down to tooling, and how you're recognizing risks, how you're generating alerts, what the platform does. But I think there's a bigger question organizationally of understanding what are the risks we're worried about? Where are we going to focus our time? And really building that into the sort of people process side of what you're doing. It's being able to say, hey, these are assets that are our crown jewels. If we have something that affects these assets, that is going to be priority one no matter what. Or being able to, having that sort of planning and understanding is critical, as well as just the tool piece, right? And the tool piece is reasonably easy to solve. You evaluate them, you buy one, and then you implement it. But I think you have to have the organizational pieces in place, no matter what the technology you build, to understand that. I think sort of threat modeling is an important piece just generally of what security teams should be doing today. It's a process that came up first as part of the SDLC, the software security development lifecycle. But it's an incredibly powerful tool that I think security teams should be using for everything. It's something they should be using as they're looking at what they're deploying and running, to say, here are real threats, here are where we should be most concerned about what we're seeing happen, or what we're seeing as risks across the board.
Totally makes sense. So on the talent side of things, we've been through the pandemic, we've been through the Great Resignation, we've been through the Great Next whatever. I can't really remember at the moment, but the upshot is there's been a whole lot of developer turnover, and despite a lot of economic uncertainty, in air quotes, the developer and IT jobs market seems to be holding fairly strong. So that is a blessing and a curse, I think, because it results in a lot of developer turnover at organizations. And what impact do you see that having on security? Reese?
Well, it ties in with what Neil brought up first earlier about automation. So, I mean, ideally, you don't have, great keepers of secrets in your organization. When they leave, the secrets leave with them. So automation is the best way to combat. I mean, even if you don't have a high turnover, automation is still the best way, preferred way to approach security, because automated systems don't forget, they don't make human error and things like that. In lieu of automated, where automation is not possible, kind of documentation, even if internal, is also important. So, having developers who need to pass things on by word of mouth, or who remember where the bodies are buried, should ideally be a kind of like a third layer of so-called security. So hopefully it doesn't play too much of a problem in mature organizations.
That's the hope. All right.
I was just going to add to that and say, automation and elimination of manual processes, and being, very aware of any areas where any one person or even any one team is a sole failure point. And sort of speaking back to some of the foundational components, if you are in the practice of making all of the changes that you need to your system through pull requests, for example, you would have an inherent sort of audit trail of who made what changes, why, and when. So making sure that there is, transparency and visibility into changes would help alleviate not the personal side, but the technical side, along with documentation, as Reese mentioned.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna jump in and provide a very different answer to that. But I think when I started in this career field in the mid-90s, there were so many open entry-level positions that it was very easy to sort of enter the funnel, build skills, and build your career. One of the things I'm hearing talking to people is there are far fewer entry-level positions, and there's far more demand for sort of mid to senior level positions. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to solve that overall, but I think it's a clarion call to each of us, especially those of us in more senior positions, that mentoring is an important part of what we do. And we should always be looking at, is there somebody who can be mentoring me to accelerate the path I'm on? And are there people that I can be giving back to, and supporting and guiding on their journey, to ensure that we can turn more sort of entry-level people into mid to senior people where we need them in the industry? I think it's an incredibly important piece of what each of us does in our career. So I'm taking the opportunity to throw that out there.
I love that. I love that. So another great question from the audience. For an organization that is implementing DevSecOps from scratch, where do you recommend that they start?
I'll jump in again.
Okay.
I was waiting for to maybe discuss GitOps, which is one of my favorites too. But so yeah, I would say, I mean, it's automation, and it's automation of the kind of release and deployment process. That's your most important kind of gate. So that's the point where I would place it. And yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of GitOps. Everything is code. As Tiffany mentioned, this also gives you a kind of built-in kind of paper trail, audit trail. Like, when was this line last changed, and by who, and in what pull request? So yeah, that'd be my answer.
Thanks, Reese. I would agree. And I would also say that having a foundation of GitOps also makes it more streamlined to adopt, additional security technologies, and also assists in your deployment of said technologies in an automated way. And as Reese mentioned, there are just some inherent benefits to adhering to, GitOps methodologies and principles, and allows you to, think about also, multi-tenant environments, least privileges, and also, the relinquishing of right privileges, or the making them not necessary, right? Especially in your higher environments. So I think that would be a good place to start.
And so I'm gonna disagree with my learned colleagues a little bit, and not that I'm a huge advocate of GitOps as well, but that can be a very heavy lift, right? Like that can be a lot of work, especially if it's a small org, you're already sort of at capacity. I'm a big fan of defense in depth in any security thinking, right? Security people tend to get focused on solving the problem in a perfect way. And that's really the enemy of getting anything done. And I've been a part of those conversations for as long as I can remember. Oh, but what about this? Start by solving some problem. Like start by solving vulnerability scanning in your pipeline, right? Just as an example. Take an open source tool, slam it in there, start getting some results, start figuring out what to do with those results, and start building something better. Get ahead of, you're going to be shocked the first time. If you have a pipeline right now that's building a container and you're not running Trivy or some other open source scanner or something there, you're going to be shocked at how many critical vulnerabilities are coming out this tail end of it, and you're going to panic immediately. Get your arms around that, and then add some linting or some best practice scanning. Build a couple of things. Start getting results. Start improving, and then you have enough momentum where you can start thinking about bigger concepts, sort of larger approaches and more strategic approaches. But I think if you're starting at zero, get one thing done, get a success, get a win, and then you can use that momentum to move forward and figure it out from there. And then when you've got sort of the mind share, then you can say, hey, GitOps is an amazing approach to solving this overall thing we're doing. Let's turn this around and do that, and sort of build from there. But realistically speaking, I think you have to start with something small and then build some blocks and then build momentum and then get to where you can have big concepts, typically.
Yeah. All right. So going back to when we were talking about culture a little bit, and obviously DevOps is a lot about what I call ruthless automation, but there's also that cultural movement piece of it, that you have to change your mindset and the way that you think about software development and security. And how do we bridge that cultural divide that tends to exist between DevOps teams and security teams? I mean, obviously that's a little bit of what DevSecOps is all about, but any other thoughts on that?
I think we've talked a little bit about encouraging collaboration amongst the different teams. Oh, and apologies, I don't know if I can't hear somebody else speaking.
No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
It's been happening a few times. But there's definitely a lot of expertise on both sides to leverage. And Neil, I totally understand your perspective for starting with something small, and GitOps can potentially be a barrier to entry. It does depend on the sort of expertise spread across your teams. But as developers, from DevOps side, from the security side, I think Git is one of the lowest common denominators in most cases. And so something as simple as, introducing changes with PRs, whether or not you're following GitOps as a whole, but requiring reviewers from both teams as an example. And I think that sort of investment from the company in general to ensure that teams understand that they're working toward a common goals, that is something that should be highlighted to encourage the collaboration.
Yeah, and I think it's really about, from a culture perspective, it's about figuring out how to put these teams together to solve common problems. I talked to a CISO recently who he has somebody in his security team once a week works with the DevOps teams solving non-security tickets, which I thought was brilliant, right? Like, it means a security person sitting there seeing the problems that DevOps is facing, seeing how they solve them, how they address them, how they approach them. I don't think every team has to do that. Some security teams aren't big enough to invest that sort of time, but it was a great example of thinking about how do I sit people down at the same desk, get them to solve the same problem, and see what everybody is doing.
Yeah, I had an answer earlier that kind of applies here as well. I think you need to make sure that your DevOps people are sent the right message via their kind of incentives and KPIs. We're in a world these days of cost efficiencies and cutbacks in the tech industry. So most teams are not going to dedicate a portion of their time to activities that they're not explicitly requested to. So to have DevOps caring about security, it's important that there are kind of metrics and incentives and a message from management that it is important. Otherwise, they'll focus on infrastructure cost savings or efficiency of deployments and things like that, and less on security.
All excellent points. All right, well, we've got just a few minutes left, so I'm going to go around and ask you all for any final thoughts you had on this topic, and then we will turn it back over to Cody. So, Neil, you want to give us your closing thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to sort of reiterate some things that I said. I think if you're in a space where you have a completely greenfield implementation, you have a lot of luxury to focus on GitOps, focus on how do I do this across the whole sort of spectrum of solving DevSecOps. How do I identify what's most important in my environment? All of those things. If you have that opportunity, do it. If you're a security team who's running to catch up with DevOps already, focus on simple solutions. Focus on making ground, building momentum, and then you can get to the large scale problems later on. But make some moves, get some things done, get some wins, and then you get ahead of the problem eventually, and you build those relationships.
All right, who wants to go next, Reese or Tiffany?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, again, just reiterating, I think that, automation is key. I mean, automation is the only way that you can scale security and that you can have reliable security, right? Like if you rely too much on, human effort, then it can be forgotten, it can be neglected, there can be errors made. So automation is key, and KPIs and incentives are key. Don't incentivize the DevOps teams for cost savings for this quarter, and then be surprised if they don't put effort into automated security, as an example. So those would be my 2 tips for DevSecOps.
Awesome. Tiffany, we're going to give you the last word.
Oh man, Reese, automation. I think we can all agree that that's a huge theme that we can look forward to and continue to build on for DevSecOps. And the reduction of toil, the elimination of opportunities for human error, is definitely supremely valuable. And opportunities that you have to bake in security tooling, make it available further left in your development cycle, I think will have play a huge role in your developers' experiences, and also help you and your security teams achieve their goals. So
awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Reese, Tiffany, Neil, for being here today and talking with me about this. Thank you so much to our audience members for hanging with us through the technical difficulties and your amazing questions to our panelists. I am going to turn things back over to Cody. and he can take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. And Tiffany, Reese, Neil, thank you all as well for joining us. I really appreciate our audience's patience today, like Sharon said, but I believe we did have a successful webinar through it all. So thank you everyone for joining us, especially to our speakers. I would like to remind everyone that this session was recorded. You will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. Of course, you can also find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section where you will find it waiting for you. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing, they are Graziella C., Mara M., Bint H., and Ladislav M. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. It should arrive in about the next 48 hours, but if you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case it happens to get filtered out. So to everyone who is still here with us, thank you so much for joining us. We would really like to hear back from you. So as soon as we close out, there will be a survey that pops up on your screen. Let us know what you thought about our program today, or if you had any suggestions for an upcoming topic, we would love to hear that as well. Either way, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Reese, Tiffany, Neil, thank you all so much.